A few months ago I did a video working on my Porsche 928. At the time I ended up replacing the fuel pump and the fuel line from the tank to the pump. During that process I ended up discovering several parts that needed to be replaced, so now I'm finally getting to replacing those parts. The first part I'm going to replace is the fuel filter that's inside the fuel tank. In order to get to it, I need to remove the fuel line that I replaced in my last video on the 928. So to start with, I'm going to clamp this fuel line since I do have about 2 gallons of fuel in the tank. Now that the fuel line is clamped, I'm going to remove the hose clamp that holds the fuel line onto the fuel pump. With the clamp loosened, I can now wiggle the line off of the pump, and then I'm going to remove the clamp and set it aside so it can't fall into the gas tank that I'm about to fill up with the gas from the car's fuel tank. Now I need to get the fuel line into the gas can and then release the clamp on it to allow the fuel from the tank to flow into the can. Now I do have roughly 2 gallons of fuel in the tank, and this is a 2.5 gallon fuel can, so I should have plenty of space, but they do have another fuel can on hand in case I need it. Alright, the tank is now empty, which you can tell because the fuel line is not clamped and I've got no fuel coming out of it. But at this point I still need to remove the other hose clamp that holds the fuel line onto the tank itself. With the fuel hose removed, you can see it was attached to the base of the fuel filter that is in the tank that I'm about to replace. As I work to remove the filter, you may notice that there was a metal pan at the bottom of the tank and it is slightly in the way. This metal pan has 4 metal straps that attach to it, and they go off in separate directions and attach to various points on the car, and they are used to support and hold the tank in place. I did have to loosen these straps a little bit to allow the metal pan to sag down a little to get my tools in, but I can't remove it entirely or the tank could fall. So this is not just a cap to the bottom of the tank. It was connected to this, and you can see that's completely broken, but it should look like this. So this is a brand new filter for inside the tank, and this is a 40-plus-year-old filter. So that's probably why my old fuel line from the tank to the pump was completely filled with crap. So this should help quite a bit. With the new filter in place, all I need to do is tighten it down to the correct torque setting. Pretty much everything on the Porsche will have a torque setting, which is great because you always know exactly how tight it needs to be, but at the same time it's really annoying because you have to go and look up things all the time to find the proper torque settings. For this one, it was a little bit difficult because I'm still not sure I found the proper one, but what I did find was about 7.5 foot-pounds is what was required, so I set my torque wrench to it, and after getting it to 7.5, it felt proper and we didn't have any leaks in the end, so I'm guessing it was correct. And now that I'm done with the filter, I can go ahead and put the fuel hose back on and re-secure it to the tank and the pump with the hose clamps. As I move into the next piece that I'm going to replace, I want to go back and correct myself. So the part I just replaced is called the fuel tank strainer, and the part I'm about to replace is the actual fuel filter for the car. Although the fuel tank strainer's job is to literally sit in the tank and filter the fuel before it gets to the fuel pump. It's still a filter, but they call it a strainer. I actually had the fuel filter on hand to replace it the last time I worked on the car, which was actually still down at the warehouse where it was in storage. Unfortunately, what I didn't have on hand was the proper wrenches to be able to break free the metal lines on each side. I only have the wrenches to be able to do one side, but didn't have the proper sizes to do the other, so I was unable to replace the filter at that time. So I've had it laying around for a little while, and I was waiting to buy more parts to just come back and do the entire fuel system at once. Here's a little interesting fact for everyone out there who doesn't own a Porsche 928 and is just kind of watching this video for fun. The fuel tank strainer is twice the price as the fuel filter, and yet the fuel filter is definitely more important since it protects the entire fuel system, whereas the strainer is really just protecting the pump from anything getting into it. With the metal lines removed, then all I have to do is loosen the clamp and the filter comes out. put the new filter in and reattach the lines. Now for reattaching the metal fuel lines, they need to be as tight as possible. If you don't get them tight enough and you turn the car on, you're gonna have a fuel leak. And if they're loose and essentially nowhere near as tight as they should be, you're not just gonna have a leak, you're gonna have fuel spray because these lines are pressurized. So do your best to make them as tight as possible. And before someone comes at me in the comments, when I say tight as possible, I mean as tight with a wrench in your hands. Don't be getting a hammer and beating on them to make them tighter. Okay, before I wrap up the video, I have one more part to install. It is the smallest and most expensive part for this video, and it is the fuel pump relay. Luckily, it's very easy to install. Simply unplug the old one and plug the new one in. My intent was to end the video by turning on the car and moving it onto the rack. Unfortunately, the battery is so dead that even jump starting it won't make the car turn on. So I'm sorry, but you guys will have to wait till the next video to see the car running.